Embrace the magic.
Greetings, fellow wizards. Today I want to talk about summons. And this is because summons are a fun aspect of RPGs, but they somehow get a bad rap in Wrath of the Righteous, especially in harder difficulties. So my idea is to go through each summon, starting with summon nature, then summon monster, and other class abilities and spells, and then to the mythic summons. So while this is not a summoning guide per se, maybe it can help you do a summon build, since I'll be showing the stats on each of the summons. So starting off with Nature's Ally 1, we have the Mite. The Mite is a level 1 Fae, very weak stats. Basically, the only saving grace, if you can call it that, is damage reduction 2 to Cold Iron, but overall very weak. The Giant Frog is a bit better. It has more health, it has decent strength, 19, and it can do a little bit of damage, 1d6 plus 7, so still not great, but you probably feel a little bit better than the Mite with the Frog. Okay, so the Leopard is a very good summon. It has a decent AC, it has good stats, but its best feature is probably the 5 attacks. It has 1 bite and 4 claws, as well as pounce. So very good if you can buff it. The Dire Boar, as a 4th level spell, it has very good strength and very high hit points. However, it only has 1 attack, so I would say this is not that good. The Manticore has a bit more health than the Dire Boar, has decent stats and 3 attacks, 1 bite and 2 claw attacks, and they do alright amount of damage. However, I don't believe it's that good. It's just okayish, maybe. I think you can probably do better. So the Smilodon, compared to the Manticore, I believe is a lot better. It has 5 attacks, really good strength, a lot more health, and I'm surprised it doesn't have pounce like the Leopard, but overall still a very good summon to buff. Nature 7 gives you the Mastodon, and this is a chunky boy. It has a lot of strength, a lot of health, decent AC sort of, and 1 gore and 1 slam attack. I think it's quite reliable. Maybe not great, but okay. Now for the Nereid, it doesn't have a lot of health for an 8th level summon. It has Nereid Spray, which should do some poison effect, and it has some damage reduction, which is nice, 10/Cold Iron. Let's see how well it does in combat. If it misses the spray, it doesn't do anything. It can't take a lot of damage at that level, and if it hits the spray, does nothing if the enemy saves. Okay, rubbish. Next. Okay, so 9th level Hamadryad. Decent amount of hit points. Has 3 attacks with the bow, and it has some spells like Greater Heroism, Confusion, Heal. Let's see how well it does in combat. Okay, so if it shoots in melee, it gets attacked, which is not great. What else? Yeah, I think it's pretty bad. But let's talk about summon monster spells. Starting with level 1, we have the Dog. And the Dog is very weak. I'm not sure if it's better or worse than the Mite. It doesn't have the damage reduction. If you want the Dog, stick to the Animal Companion, which is amazing. The summon just isn't worth it. The Wolf is a bit better. It gets a bite that can trip, does a bit more damage. Still not great. I would say overall it's still pretty weak. The Monitor Lizard has a single bite that can poison. A bit more health. Overall, I think it's also weak. Your poison against demon is not going to do anything. Okay, so the Dire Wolf has okay-ish stats and health. It has one strong bite that can trip. But again, if you only have one bite, you really have to land the trip. But with summons, you can't get the CMB high enough like with pets. So summon monster 5, you have two options. The good option is the Bralani Azata. And he has things like Blur, Mirror Image, can cast Lightning Bolt, has immunity to electricity, but it's a caster type. And caster types are generally pretty bad. As you can see here, the enemy is just attacking me, it spent a turn casting Mirror Image, and then it's gonna cast a Lightning Bolt that does pretty much nothing. On the other hand, the evil option is the Redcap. And the Redcap is quite interesting since it wants to get in close and do its attacks, which are not bad. It basically has a scythe attack and a kick. So these do a decent amount of damage, and it also has damage reduction 10 / cold iron. So I think it's a decent melee option. Much better than the Bralani Azata, in my opinion. Next up we have the Axiomite for the good option, and I think this is alright, mainly because of regeneration. It doesn't actually die after it gets to 0 health. It has 2 attacks with the longsword, decent health. And yeah, maybe it can hold most of the creature. As long as it doesn't spam lightning, it's okay. Next up we have the Soul Eater for the evil option. And this Soul Eater is interesting. It has a lot of immunities, has 2 claw attacks, which don't do a lot of damage, but they do stat drain. And the stat that it drains is Wisdom, I believe. Yes, as you can see here, 6 Wisdom damage. So, not bad. Okay, Bogeyman is an option available to both evil and good. It is the Fear Striker, basically. It gets Phantasmal Killer, Crushing Despair. It has an aura of Deepest Fear that when it lands its claw attacks, it can take the fear level into a higher level. So the enemy can even be coward and not do anything. So this is quite interesting. You might get lucky and maybe the enemy rolls low on the save. So let's see how it is in combat. So here you can see the interesting thing that it uses the Phantasmal Killer and also attacks with its claw. So I think given that it has this bundle of abilities that go together, overall it's pretty solid. And maybe if you get a lot of Bogeymans together, one will get lucky with the Phantasmal Killer, just like it did now. So at level 8, as a good option, we have the Monadic Deva. And it has decent health, decent stats, immunities, resistance to fire, electricity. It can do 3 attacks with the heavy mace, however, it suffers from the caster problem. And the caster problem in this case, it's always going to cast Holy Aura in the first turn. And if it does eventually attack the enemy with the heavy mace, it doesn't do a lot of damage. It's just okay. The Frost Giant, on the other hand, even though it only has 2 attacks with its Great Axe, does a lot more damage than the Deva. So it is much better in my opinion. So finally at level 9, for the good option, we have the Ghaele Azata, and it has this interesting gaze attack. It has a lot of immunities and 3 attacks with a Holy Long Sword and spells, which we don't want. But again, let's see how it works in combat. Surely this light ray that bypasses all damage reduction and deals 2d12 damage is gonna be game breaking for us at level 9. So yes, 1 turn spent using Divine Power. Awesome. Let's see what it does next. Oh, look at that. Almost as damaging as a Hellfire Ray. Wonderful. Chef's kiss. To be fair, it can also dispel magic the opponent, but something tells me that it's probably not very reliable at the level you use the spell. Now, a much more interesting option, in my opinion, is the level 9 Thanadaemon, and that's because it has this interesting Fear Gaze. It has spells that it can actually land and do something, like Enervation, and 3 quarterstaff attacks that if they land, it also does Energy Drain, which is this draining weapon ability it has here. So already here you can see it starts with a nice Energy Drain. So the enemy is cowering, probably due to some Fear Aura. It's already getting a lot of negative levels. It's not doing anything. And then the Thanadaemon is also going to attack it. And with each attack, drain the levels even more and kill the enemy. Okay, but what about other classes that have abilities like summoning a Hellhound? And this belongs to the Hell Knight. Unless you get this somehow extremely early, it's pretty bad. It does very little damage, it has very little health. Maybe the only good thing about it is that you can summon multiple of them. Animate Dead, however, can summon many skeletal champions, and even though individually they're weak, they serve as good cannon fodder. Create Undead has 2 types. The Guardian Armor, as the name suggests, is pretty tanky. It has damage reduction 15 / adamantine, and it can also sunder armor, which can be a useful skill depending on the enemy. The Graveknight is like the more offensive version of Create Undead. I think it can do a decent amount of damage. So if you're focusing on undead, but you don't need the undead to tank anything, and you're just using them for damage, as you can see here, it does alright. Create Greater Undead can give you greater shadow, and in general you will see that I like incorporeal creatures because depending on the enemy, incorporeal creatures might not take any damage if they're using, let's say, normal weapons. So this is obviously an advantage, and besides that, stat draining can be quite useful to debuff the enemy. The other option is the Devourer, and the Devourer apparently can create undead, and it has an energy drain ability. It might be better for physical combat, but overall I believe the Shadow has more uses. So there's a level 9 Druid spell that summons an Elder Purple Worm, and it has a lot of health, does good damage with a bite and sting, and it can also do a poison, which is probably very potent. But again, given that demons are immune to poison and you can't get Ascendant Poison on your summons. I believe this is not great. The Burrow ability might be nice, because while it's moving, it stays hidden. But I think it's alright. Nothing spectacular. Okay, now the Elemental Swarm is also a level 9 ability, and the interesting part about it is that you can summon various types at once, and for each 5 rounds that passes after casting the spell, bigger and more evolved elementals of that type will appear. So not that great for use in combat, but if you maybe cast it outside of combat, then get all your elementals bunched up together with their higher, better versions, and basically you're leading this elemental army against an enemy. Here in this case, I was in unfair difficulty and didn't buff them, so they were missing a lot. But if they are well buffed, you can imagine the chaos that they wreak upon the enemy. The Creeping Doom spell. So yes, it summons a spider swarm, and the main advantage of the Creeping Doom is that it's diminutive size, so a lot of enemies can't damage it. And as the round passes, they are distracting and doing ability damage to the enemy. You can also combine it with, let's say, Mark of Justice to bypass damage reduction. So, very interesting summon indeed. So the Living Plague is a level 9 summon spell available only to the Prophet of Pestilence. And the reason it's so good is that even if the enemy saves, it still does ability damage, I think 1. But it also does all the types of ability damage. And it will do as the enemy moves through the area and each tick. So, yeah. So now we enter the realm of mythic summons, and at MR2 everyone gets access to O Wisp. And the Will-O-Wisp is okay, I guess. It has immunity to spells, I suppose, natural invisibility. Maybe it can be a good defensive option, but as you can see here, not so much. And offensively, not great. So talking about spell immunity, we're gonna enter the Aeon summons. At MR4 they get the Stone Golem. And as you can see with all the golems, they have a lot of immunities, like mind affecting, spell immunity, immunity to compulsion, paralysis, as they are basically constructs. And they do a good amount of damage. The Iron Golem is similar to the Stone Golem. I believe the difference, it has a bit more damage reduction, 15/adamantine. It also gets 2 slam attacks, and it gets a breath weapon which can deal poison. And again, poison is not great on summons, but overall pretty decent. The Gold Golem at MR6 is also pretty much the same thing, except that it's, instead of a poison breath, it has the prismatic surge ability. I believe the surge works after the attack lands, but as the enemy saved in this case, I couldn't see exactly what effect it did. And lastly, the Adamantine Golem is at MR8 the Golem on steroids. It has immunity to magic, damage reduction 15/epic, does a lot of damage, high attack. Overall pretty good. And just a reminder, Aeon dispels the enemies with its summons. So Trickster at MR3 can use spells that summon a pony, which is extremely weak. They do call it summon level 0 or something like that. And the small beer elemental, as well as all the beer elementals, they are also quite weak. They get this punch drunk ability, which I suppose can be good if the enemy fails the save. I feel like you have to be drunk to rely on these summons. However, at MR3 it also gets Nixie Prankster, which is kind of okay for a caster type because the spells can actually be useful, like the Hideous Laughter here. And it also casts Confusion. And I believe it has some defensive spells, maybe an invisibility, a displacement. It's not bad actually. Okay, so the grizzly bear appears in a pool of its own grease, which means it can fall right after you summon it. However, it is an AoE that follows it, and it can also trip the enemies. Interesting, I suppose. At MR5, Tricksters get Wild Hunt Archer, and they have this Wild Hunt link that they share with everyone, and they have 4 attacks with the longbow, and also have Rapid Shot, some damage reduction, Unearthly Grace, Many Shot, so that's quite a lot of attacks, not bad. And given that it uses a composite longbow, I assume that if you buff its strength by a lot, it should do a lot of damage with a lot of attacks. So this is one to keep in mind. The Wild Hunt Scout, however, is a strange little fey creature. It has this crystal ability, which it's like a beam that it can fire at enemies. And it can also do some sneak attack. Overall, I just think the archer is so much better. Trickster also gets a spell that summons a perpetually annoyed wizard. And as you can imagine, summoning an annoyed wizard can have negative consequences. I would avoid this one. Likewise, at MR7 they can use the spell Hog of Desolation. And it doesn't seem very friendly to me here, but it does arrive in a little colorful bang that does damage to everyone in an AoE, so maybe it has some utility. And at MR8 we have the Wild Hunt Monarch, which has a lot of health. It can summon by using Call the Hunt, and which immediately arrive on the first turn. It also has Finger of Death, Dispel Magic Greater. It's pretty strong, I would say. Not bad. For Angel at MR3, they get 2 Spirit Paladins when they summon. And they're basically goody undeads. So that means they get a lot of immunities. But best of all, they're also incorporeal. So incorporeals at MR3 is really good because a lot of enemies still can't damage you. On the flip side, their damage is pretty bad. So since we've already covered Movenic Deva, we will skip to MR6, in which Angel gets Astral Deva. The Astral Deva has some nice immunities, gets 3 attacks with its Warhammer +3. Overall, I think it's just a solid summon. So at MR9, Angel gets Spirit Paladin, and it has a lot of health, a lot of energy resistances, which are quite high, a lot of immunities. It's also incorporeal. It has 4 attacks with its longsword, and it has Might Evil, Mark of Justice, so maybe if you can buff its charisma, it might be very, very good. Seems interesting. At MR3, the demon gets the Annoying Rock, and since it's so annoying, you can imagine how annoying it will be to enemies, since it starts with the AoE stun, mirror image, so pretty solid option. At MR4, Demon gets Gibrileth, and Gibrileth has quite a few attacks, and this Tumor's ability. It can also do ability damage with its attacks, and it's amorphous. So if it can survive the initial turn it's summoned, I think it can be good. At MR5, Demon gets Oliodru. And boy, oh boy, this is one of the worst summons in the game, and even enemies that you can face. And this is because a lot of turns it does nothing, just stays invisible. I hardly ever see it use its spells, So yeah, just skip this one. At MR6 we have the Painajai, and I'm probably butchering these pronunciations, but let's go. It has the Chain Spear, which reminds me of Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. It can do trips, confusion. Overall, I think its attacks are pretty weak. Not a lot of damage there. So maybe I'm missing something out. At MR7, the demon gets the Lilitu, which is the Seductress, who has Dominate Person and 5 attacks, which is not bad. However, it is quite weak defensively, so it dies pretty fast. So at MR8, demon gets Vrolikai, and guys, look at the amount of attacks it has. 7 on dagger attacks, a bite and a sting. Wow. If you're a demon summoning build, please use this creature and then tell me all about it. But yes, it can even do extra effects besides all the attacks it has. It can also inflict madness with its tail. If that isn't enough, as you will see here, it can cast Enervation and then follow up with all of its attacks. Please buff this creature to the max. At MR9 you have the Balor, and the Balor is okay. I mean, it has 4 longsword attacks and 1 flaming whip attack, and this Vorpal Strike, which I'm not exactly sure how it works. Maybe it's a chance to automatically kill a creature, don't know. But I just didn't find it as impressive as the Vrolikai, and it also doesn't last long in combat. So the Lich at MR3 gets the Fallen, and just like the Spirit Paladin, it is incorporeal, so extremely good at the time you get it. Having 3 attacks is also pretty nice. At MR4, the Lich gets the Plagued Mastodon. It's a chunky boy with a Gore and a Slam attack that do quite a bit of damage. Not a bad option. So at MR6 you have the Akorsh, which is an undead with only 2 claw attacks, but a lot of health. And Seize Skin ability, which if the enemy fails a fortitude, can do some constitution drain and stagger. Meh, I think this is a weak summon. At MR7, the Lich gets the Nightshade Nightcrawler, which is a big boy with a bite and a gore attack that do a lot of damage, and it takes a lot of area too, as you can see here. So maybe this is nice for a choke point. And at MR9 you get the Ravener, which is basically like a Draco Lich. You have all the undead immunities, you have 6 attacks, 1 bite, 2 claws, 2 wings, 1 tail, that all do decent amount of damage. You have a breath weapon, frightful presence, and overall this is just a very strong summon. Also, look at how badass it looks. So yeah, I hope this video was useful to you in some way. These are my general recommendations. Buff your summons as much as you can if you're gonna go into this playstyle. Don't rely on heavy caster types that don't do anything but buff themselves. More attacks means more bang for your buffs. So Leopard, Smilodon, Vrolikai, all these with a lot of buffs will do extremely well. Incorporeal and certain immunities can be extremely useful, especially if you get them early. Also, in the summon monster line, evil generally beats good summons, and all low level summons suck. You have few buffs, so they're basically cannon fodder until later. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have done any summon build that's worked. And see you next time.
Thank you for watching, fellow wizard, and may magic be with you.